One of the names from the past that I didn't really expect to be dominating the news today has returned. And that's Dominic Cummings, the man whose political machinations have shaped, destabilised, reshaped the British right with all the delicacy of a wrecking ball. And this time, however, Cummings isn't merely tinkering with the Conservative Party or playing with his eyesight. He appears to have set his sights on an even more radical ambition, merging, supplanting, or altogether reinventing the political right with Reform UK and its perennial rabble-rouser Nigel Farage. And in the process, it looks as if he is planning to drive out Kemi Badenoch. So from that point of view, so much the better. Cummings, the Vote Leave mastermind turned Downing Street exile, has reportedly met up with Farage to discuss the future of Reform UK. A man once dismissed as a horrible, nasty little man by Farage now finds himself aligned with the Reform leader in what can only be described as a grand realignment of right-wing forces. And this meeting, revealed by the Sunday Times today, suggests that Cummings is no longer content with criticising the failures of the Tory party from the sidelines. He wants to orchestrate their downfall, or at least their hostile takeover. And according to Cummings' recent Substack post, his vision is one of radical transformation. Shove out Kemi Badenoch, take control of the Tories, engineer a merger with Reform UK, and inject a third force of elite talent to create a political entity that voters see as a decisive break from what he describes as the failures of 1992 to 2024. Well, the sheer ambition of this scheme should not be underestimated. It is, in essence, a blueprint for obliterating the Conservative Party as we know it and replacing it with a harder-edged, more populist movement steeped in economic libertarianism, cultural nationalism, and institutional iconoclasm. Now, I think what will happen, if he has his way, is Reform UK will slightly enlarge, the Conservatives will slightly diminish or be taken over, and that means in practice the Lib Dems will become the opposition and demonstrate whether or not they have the capacity to take over at the next election as the party of choice for government. The timing of this revelation is crucial. With the Conservatives bracing for a near-apocalyptic wipeout in the May local elections, the vultures are certainly circling, and Kemi Badenoch, who has tried to hold the centre ground of a crumbling party while veering as close to the right as she possibly can, is facing an internal revolt. Reports indicate that her detractors are already devising a grid of attacks to systematically undermine her leadership post-May. No, in theory, she has a year to destroy herself and the party. But if Badenoch is weakened enough, she may be forced out before the end of that year, and certainly before the next general election, clearing the way for a more pliable leader, perhaps Robert Jenrick, oh God, or even, as some may whisper, Boris Johnson or Penny Mordaunt to forge a new pact with Farage and Reform UK. Meanwhile, Reform UK is no stranger to internal chaos. The stuff in the last week has seen a spectacular bust-up between Farage and his former ally and colleague Rupert Lowe, culminating in Lowe's expulsion from the party with allegations of bullying. There's also the troubling case of Jack Aaron, the party's head of candidate vetting, whose remarks about Hitler and President Assad have raised serious questions about Reform's quality control. These controversies have underscored the fundamental problem for Reform UK. It is not yet a serious party of government. Its candidates have been plagued by scandals, its infrastructure is embryonic, its internal battles threaten to undermine its electoral appeal, its approach to discipline is the bully boy approach which certainly existed in UKIP. Nevertheless, the electoral calculus suggests that Reform UK could win control of multiple local councils in May and significantly erode the Tory vote share. And Cummings' involvement is an indication that serious figures on the right are starting to view Reform as not just a protest movement, but as a potential vehicle for government. But can they actually execute their plan? The barriers are formidable. First, there's the issue of party infrastructure. Reform lacks the Tory party's deep donor networks, seasoned operatives, and nationwide organisational strength. Second, while Farage is a formidable campaigner, His brand is divisive. His flirtations with Trump and Elon Musk alienate as many voters as they attract. And finally, there's the question of unity. If the right is to mount a credible challenge to Labour, it cannot afford the kind of internecine warfare that has already dogged reform and will surely explode within the Tories if Badenoch is ousted in a coup. There is an argument to be made that Cummings' latest project is an exercise in political alchemy, one that seeks to transmute the current chaos of the British right into an electable movement, but history suggests that Cummings is at his most effective when he has an institutional structure to work within, erode and bite back at. He is a maverick. He likes to rebel. He thrived in the Vote Leave campaign, where he had legal authority and funding. He wielded considerable influence in Downing Street until he overplayed his hand and was cast into the political wilderness. And now, without a formal role, he's left to scheme from the sidelines like some sort of maniacal ant or cockroach, hoping that his intellectual musings will translate into real-world political power. Ultimately, his Unite the Right project hinges on whether Reform UK can genuinely replace the Conservative Party as the dominant force on the right. And that, in turn, depends on whether voters truly see Farage as a credible prime ministerial figure or merely as an eternal gadfly. At present, Reform is rising in the polls, but it's not yet at the threshold of overtaking the Tories. In serious terms, even if every so often it looks as if it's more popular. Moreover, Starmer's government, despite its unpopularity, still benefits from the divided opposition. Now, what's extraordinary is that the Times doesn't mention the Lib Dems at all, and I think the Lib Dems are the ones that we should be looking out for. And I think equally, even if Cummings were to have his way, and there were to be a new right-wing merger of the Reform and the Conservatives, there would be a rump of the Conservatives left who simply do not subscribe to that far-right ethos. And among those, I think, would be Boris Johnson. This is a high-stakes gamble. Cummings and Farage believe that the time is ripe for a right-wing insurgency to upend British politics. And if they succeed, we could see the most dramatic political realignment in Britain since the collapse of the Liberal Party in the early 20th century. If they fail, it will be just another chapter in the long history of right-wing infighting that has plagued British conservatism for decades. The battle lines are now drawn. Kemi Badenoch is under siege. The Tories are teetering. Reform is sharpening its knives. And in the shadows, Dominic Cummings, ever the architect of chaos, is watching, waiting, and plotting his next move.